It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend at our ranch cabin, just me, my daughter, and the quiet comfort of the hills. No distractions, no noise, just time to reconnect away from the chaos of everyday life. But that peace didn't last long. The sun had barely risen when I noticed two unfamiliar blacked-out SUVs creeping down our private road. No markings, no plates, just tinted windows and bad intentions. At first glance, they looked like law enforcement vests, radios, even sidearms. But something didn't sit right. Their behavior was off, too aggressive, too rehearsed. And then they made their move, walking straight past me and toward the kennel where my daughter's golden retriever. Rusty was wagging his tail like he was greeting old friends. Within seconds, everything changed. A sharp command, a loud noise, and, just like that, Rusty was gone. My daughter screamed. I froze, but only for a moment, 'cause while they thought they were intimidating some helpless ranch dad, what they didn't know was I spent over a decade working for the CIA, and I saw their type before, many times. These weren't real cops. This wasn't just some mix-up about property lines or HOA violations. This was something bigger, something darker. The so-called officers claimed they were acting on behalf of the local HOA, enforcing some vague compliance order. But HOAs don't send armed men in unmarked vehicles. And they definitely don't break into private property without a warrant. Now, I was no longer just a dad on a weekend trip. I was a man with a past trained, experienced, and now pushed too far. What they started that morning would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. And trust me, they messed with the wrong guy. After I got my daughter inside and made sure she was safe, I stepped back out, trying to keep my emotions in check. The so-called officers were already spreading out, walking the property like they owned it. One of them glanced back at me, hand resting casually on his holster, like it was some kind of warning. But it only confirmed what I already suspected. These men weren't here to talk. They were sent to intimidate. Or worse, I've seen tactics like this overseas. Private contractors pretending to be official, flashing badges that don't stand up to a second look. It's all about control, fast, aggressive pressure, especially when they assume the target won't push back. But out here, they made one huge mistake. They didn't check who they were dealing with. This ranch cabin's been in my family for years. It's not part of any HOA, which made their excuse even more suspicious. I hadn't received a single warning, letter, or call. Nothing. Just armed men, no paperwork, and a dead family pet. And now they were poking around like they were hunting for something. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I slipped around the side of the cabin and quietly grabbed the old trail cam memory card. I had set it up weeks ago to monitor the back trail, never expecting I'd need it for anything serious. But it might have captured the SUVs arriving or even who sent them. Inside the cabin, my daughter sat shaking, eyes red, holding Rusty's collar in her hands. She was trying to be strong, but she didn't understand why this happened. Truth is, I didn't either, not completely. But I was going to find out. And when I did, someone was going to have to answer for it. The deeper I dug, the stranger things got. By the third day, I knew I couldn't just wait around for them to show up again. I had to get ahead of it. I took the footage from the trail cam, ran it through an old facial recognition tool I kept from my time in the agency. The result hit fast. One of the men was tied to a private security firm that had been investigated for shady land seizures overseas. That confirmed it. This wasn't some neighborhood dispute. It was a calculated push for control, and my cabin was in the middle of it. Back at the ranch, my daughter stayed close. She barely spoke, always looking out the window like she expected those men to return. I told her we were safe now, but I knew that wasn't true. If they'd come once, they'd come again, especially since they hadn't found what they were looking for. And I still had no idea what that was. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I heard it. Tires crunching, gravel slow. Deliberate. I stepped outside, weapon holstered but ready. 2 SUVs again, same unmarked look. But this time, they stopped at the gate instead of charging in. One of the men stepped out, hand raised like we were going to have a calm conversation. My instinct screamed otherwise. I walked down the drive, stopping just short of the gate. He smiled like we were neighbors. Said they were following up on a compliance report and asked if I'd had a chance to consider cooperating. I didn't answer. I just stared, studying every twitch, every glance they exchanged. One of them was clearly holding something behind his back. Then the man glanced toward the house toward my daughter's window and everything in me went cold. That moment, I knew this wasn't just about land. They were escalating, pushing boundaries, testing how far I'd let them go, and I was done letting anything slide. I didn't flinch. I held the man's stare, waiting for him to make the next move. But just before he could speak again, a third SUV appeared, different make. Darker windows, no headlights. It pulled up quietly behind the first two and parked without a sound. The air shifted. Even the men pretending to be in control seemed uneasy now. One of them looked over his shoulder like he wasn't expecting backup. The rear door opened and out stepped a woman in a tailored suit, not dressed for the ranch, not armed like the others. She walked with authority, every step measured. The rest of them fell silent. She didn't look at me first. She looked at the cabin, then she turned, nodded slightly, and said, "Mr. Kane, we need to talk. Privately." That stopped me cold. No one here knew my real last name, at least not unless they'd gone digging through a past I'd buried under years of careful moves and clean records. I hadn't used that name since the day I left the agency. So how did she know it? I stayed. "Still, who are you?" I asked flatly. She smiled just enough to be unsettling. "I think you already know. And I think you know this isn't about your cabin anymore." And that's when it clicked. They weren't here just to force me off the land. They were after something else, something connected to my old life, something I didn't even realize. I had, maybe hidden, maybe buried, but definitely valuable enough to send fake officers, private mercenaries. And now someone who knew my real identity. Back in D.C., we used to run black files off-grid missions with no paper trail. And sometimes, those missions didn't end cleanly. Now I was starting to wonder if something from one of those missions had followed me home. And if it had, they weren't going to stop until they got it. I told her to walk with me off the driveway and into the open pasture where I knew there were no ears, at least not the kind she trusted. She agreed without hesitation. As we walked, she laid it out. Years ago, during an operation in Eastern Europe, I intercepted a drive full of raw, INTO-classified tech blueprints, names, bribes, and proof of a shadow network embedded in multiple governments. I handed the data off, assumed it was dealt with, but apparently a backup copy had been unknowingly embedded into a civilian drone I brought back and stored. In the cabin's attic, the drone was old, barely functional. I hadn't thought about it in years, but to them, it was priceless. And they believed I still had it, which meant I was a liability they had to control or erase. I asked her who she was really working for, and that's when her tone changed. "Not who. What?" she said. "The program's still alive. Quiet. Buried, but alive. And you're one of the few who knows where it ends." Before I could respond, shots rang out from the house. I bolted. She didn't follow. The fake officers had made their move. I charged in through the back, flanking the front room, and caught 2 of them mid-search. They weren't expecting resistance, especially not from someone who'd trained to clear buildings in far worse situations. Within seconds, it was over. No one was seriously hurt, but the message was loud and clear. This wasn't intimidation anymore. It was a hunt. I got my daughter, grabbed the drone, and we left before sunrise. The cabin was compromised. I uploaded the contents of the drone to a secure network. I still had access to one that made sure if anything happened to me, the files would go public. But just when I thought we were in the clear, my phone buzzed. A blocked number. Voice I hadn't heard in over a decade simply said, "You were never supposed to survive that mission, Kane." Then the line went dead. That call shook me more than I let on. Not because of the threat, but because it confirmed everything. The mission all those years ago had never truly ended. They let me walk away thinking it was finished, thinking I was safe. But I'd been a loose end this whole time, and now the past had finally come collecting. I didn't go back to the cabin, left it behind, just like the name Kane. I knew staying would only put my daughter at risk again. We relocated to a quiet town under different names, far from HOA claims, fake cops, and unmarked SUVs. I made sure she went back to school, surrounded by normal things, friends, sports, the sound of laughter I hadn't heard from her in weeks. Slowly, she started to heal. So did I, in my own way. The files from the drone were encrypted and spread across multiple safe servers, released in parts to select sources who knew how to handle that kind of truth. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted accountability. Some of those names are starting to surface now. Quiet investigations, silent retirements. No headlines, but the shadows are shifting. That's enough for me. As for the woman in the suit, I never saw her again. Maybe she was a warning. Maybe she helped more than I'll ever know. Either way, she was part of a world I no longer belonged to. Sometimes people ask why I left the agency. The truth is, I wanted a life that didn't revolve around secrets and threats. I wanted peace. And for a while, I had it. But when you've lived in the shadows long enough, you learn peace isn't always permanent. Still, I'd do it all again to protect my daughter. Because some things are worth standing up for.